lack of specificity on structural reforms. The document is very much focused on the fiscal side, and we certainly want to know more, and we'll have questions on exactly what the government can do and not do on structural reforms, product market reforms, and labor market reforms. Where the document is less specific, but this is all manageable. That will be part of the discussion. I would like to insist very much on one element Pierre mentioned, which has to do with higher actions. This is about restoring trust, not only on trust of ministers, which is for you to discuss, but also trust of financial markets and trust of depositors. And for that, the rule is really three-pronged. There has to be strong, solid higher action as soon as possible, probably this week or next week, certainly before the end of June, to regulate the climate of confidence that will also strengthen the financial system. And there will be a need for further action milestones in July if there is money to be disbursed in July. So one of the key aspects of the discussion that we start right now is to take the document and map it into a sequence of higher actions on which the Greek government can politically commit, as I said, one last information is that the Governing Council of the ECB this morning did not object to emergency liquidity supervision for today from 85.8 billion euros to 87.8 billion euros. So potentially an additional 2 billion euros to cater for possible deposit outflows today, and the situation will be reassessed later tonight or early tomorrow morning, depending on the evolution. In particular, depending on deposit outflows today. The information we have so far, that it was of 4 large refunds as of lunchtime, is that deposit outflows are more muted than on Friday. So we see kind of I will not say a stabilization, it would be too optimistic, but acceleration of deposit outflows, given the more positive news coming this morning. That's as far as I can say.
Thank you. Christine.
Thank you very much. I think this document that we have received is actually both strategic and smart. It's strategic because it was released certainly to us at midnight in version 1, at 8 a.m. in version 2, and at 10 a.m. in version 3. So I don't know whether version 4 is coming or whether we have something else to expect, but in that way it's very strategic. And it's coming so late, which is sad in a way, because we could have made much more progress had we had the opportunity and the time to just go through each and every proposal. It is smart in the way that it seems to use the framework of what we have called repeatedly the aide-mémoire, which, as you will remember, is this document which cannot be really shared without issue with some parliaments, but which is in and of itself a diluted version from the memorandum initially. So this strategic and smart document is moving in that direction of the aide-mémoire, but is certainly not the aide-mémoire as it is. Neither from the fiscal standpoint, which is also very smartly addressed, nor in the content, nor in the structural reforms, nor in the smart omissions that pepper here and there the document. So, having been negative as is expected quite often from the IMF, but honest to what I have had about 20 minutes to go through, I think that there are positive moves in quite a few directions, but it lacks specificity, it's only semi-comprehensive, and we need to actually sit down and do some real technical work in order to assess what will be unleashed by the various proposals. We cannot say because there is 0.0x of VAT or 0.0y of VAT, or because there will be additional contributions to finance the pension system as is proposed in some instances, it's going to breach the gap. When I do a simple, stupid exercise of comparing what we had in the MMO, which was 1% of the GDP out of pension reform, 1% of GDP out of VAT reform, and 0.5% of GDP out of the subsidies reform, it doesn't add up for the moment. But I don't want to prejudge because we have not had time to actually do the work that needs to be done. The only comment that I would make on the substance is that we find it quite growth unfriendly, which is exactly the opposite direction of what we would like to take going forward, to make it more growth friendly. Is it going to be 100% growth friendly? Probably not. Difficult in the present circumstances, but it doesn't have to be very growth unfriendly in that it focuses on additional contribution on labour, where the labour cost edge is already quite high, and it adds to the corporate tax, which, as we know, is historically difficult to collect in many countries, but in Greece in particular. On the structural reforms, we are, I think, a bit short on many points, but as I said, don't want to go into the details of it unless we have the time to do the work and the three institutions can come to, hopefully, a very common view, which is what we intend to work towards. In terms of process, I'm very much looking forward to the teams sitting down very promptly this afternoon in order to assess and measure the contributions of the proposals, identify the gaps, and see how it can be bridged. I think that needs to be done promptly. I'm not sure that the next 2 days will be sufficient, but I'm certain that it will not be sufficient to reach what under IMF jargon we call a staff level agreement, which requires that there be a list of prior action, financing for the next 12 months, assurance of financing going forward, and a debt sustainability analysis, which will be a factor of the current debt and possibly debt operation. Having said that, I'm sure that alternative sequences can be envisaged, and from our perspective, we are very keen to sit down from 3 p.m. onwards and to hope that there is broad support in Athens for what is clearly a change of approach by the authorities.
Thank you very much. Yannis, we started without you. Sorry, I wasn't sure whether you were very close or still very far. Someone asked how long it would take you to come by motorbike from Athens, but luckily you were quite close. So you've only missed a short part of the introduction by the Commission. The three institutions have given a very first overview of your new proposals, but of course I would like you to introduce them more, and then we'll see where we stand.
Thank you very much, Jeroen. Thank you to the institutions. Let me get one thing completely straight in response to Christine's comment about the smartness of strategic element in the way and the timing of the presentation. Christine, let me assure you that there was no strategic delay involved. The reason why you got it late was because we were working very, very hard. Colleagues, you have to understand that the kind of compromises that we have effected, that we have introduced to this in this text, are politically extremely difficult. It's not simply a question of 3 or 4 of us sitting around the table and deciding them. The reason why there was a second version during the night, I wasn't aware there was a third, but I don't believe there was a third. There was a second version during the night, was because there were some technical details that had to be corrected. There was no political change in the middle of the night. Christine, you described the approach that we have taken as smart, and I suspect what you mean, and I think I'm being faithful to the spirit in which you said it, is that we are trying to fudge, we're trying to stay within the institutions' expectations of us, but at the same time not to. This is how I understand your point. Colleagues, let me remind you that our guiding principle, and I think we all agree on that, is the 20th of February agreement. And let me remind you that it took 3 Eurogroups to reach that agreement, and the whole point of that agreement, especially if you read the text of the 20th of February, was to establish common ground between the existing MoU, the existing program, and the new ideas that this government was elected to pursue. This is precisely what we are doing now. So I believe that the approach we have taken is fully in the spirit of the 20th of February agreement. We are trying to find a common ground between a program which, in the opinion of many, including some within the IMF, I believe, has failed to achieve its targets, the targets that were set in 2012. There were various, how shall I say, predictive failures that were involved in that program. There were clearly huge failures on the Greek side in terms of implementation, in terms of achieving the growth targets that were set. And at the same time, we need to stay within the framework, but bring it up to the new set of circumstances and put together a reform package that we can push through the Greek parliament, push through your parliaments, through your governments, and make a success of it. So it is quite clear, and I welcome the view of the other institutions as well as Christine's, that this is a framework for reaching an agreement, for founding an agreement within it. As you can see, we have made great strides at meeting the institutions all the way in terms of the fiscal targets, in particular the primary surplus numbers of 1%, 2%, 3%, and thereafter 3.5%. We have put forward parametric measures, more than what was asked by the institutions. The institutions were asking for 2.5%. We have offered parametric measures of more than 2.8% by 2016. The difference here is that the VAT target that the institutions presented to us of 1%, we do not believe that we can extract it parametrically without any improvements in collectability. We believe that on the basis of a pretty thorough mesoeconomic, partly microeconomic, partly macroeconomic analysis, that the best we can do parametrically is about 0.75% of GDP through parametric measures. Now, there seems to me that there is a small incongruity here on the part of the institutions, and in particular of the IMF. The argument that was being put to us as to why we need to simplify the VAT code was that it increases collectability. But when we agreed on that, and we proposed a major simplification of the VAT code, we were asked to produce numbers parametrically, assuming that there is no improvement in collectability. I just want to mention that as an indication of the differences that still exist. But on the question of pensions, we have produced numbers that credibly promise more than 1%, just above 1% of GDP in savings for the pension system. We propose to do it differently. Instead of cutting pensions, we are proposing an increase in contributions by both. I'll come to this in a minute. On top of that, we have undertaken significant defense cuts in defense expenditure, and of course other administrative measures, which are very important. Firstly, because one of the great problems in Greece, as everybody knows, is the collection of tax. It's not so much tax rates and parametric values. On the question of the growth friendliness that Christine mentioned, now this is of course the crucial key. It is the key that will unlock success for this program and for the future arrangements for the Greek economy. The point we wish to make is that we have accepted the fiscal numbers of the institutions, fully cognizant of the fact that these numbers are recessionary. When in an economy like the one we have now, which is in recession, has never managed to get out of recession, even in 2014, at least in nominal terms. When you introduce 2.8% of measures, this is by definition not particularly growth friendly. We had to compute, to estimate our different multipliers. So for instance, whether it is growth friendly or not, or relatively growth friendly compared to the institutional suggestions, depends on whether you think, for instance, that reducing the lowest of the low pensions has a smaller or larger multiplier effect compared to increasing corporate tax. But this is an empirical matter. And we can sit down, of course, with our technical teams and discuss this this afternoon until we reach an agreement. More precisely on the pensions, because the pensions are very important, I think, for all institutions, all three institutions, and for us. We have determined and committed to introduce legislation immediately that drastically limits early retirements beginning 1st of January, this coming January of 2016. To push the minimum age of retirement, effective retirement, not formal retirement, at 67 by the year 2025. From this year, we are proposing that anyone who goes on early retirement using the provisions of existing law, which cannot just be cut off from one day to the next, there will be a 10% surcharge, effectively a reduction in their pension in the form of a contribution to their own pension fund. That's on top of the existing 6%. So there will be a 16% reduction in the pension that will be received, in the take-home pension, in a sense. The solidarity cash tranche that Pierre mentioned before, we've agreed to begin replacing it in 2018 and to phase it out completely by 2020 within an appropriate framework compensating pensioners below the official poverty line. At the same time, again, in the context of pension reform and reaching that level of just above 1% of measures benefiting the pension system and its sustainability, we are proposing to increase the health contribution of those on supplementary benefits by 5%, from 0%, which is now, to 5%, to increase the social security contribution for those who are not already enjoying a supplementary pension but who are working towards it, to increase it by 0.5% of their salary, to harmonize contributions in the public sector and make them equivalent to those in the private sector. That is a significant improvement in the finances of the pension funds. And of course, to complete the consolidation of pension funds with an effective and important saving in the operating costs of pension funds by the 31st of December of 2016. Now, additionally, we have other parametric measures that we are proposing as part of this document that was related to the institutions overnight. For instance, I mentioned the defense cuts. We're talking about immediate defense cuts of 200 million, reforming the income tax code that involves capital taxation, investment vehicles, farmers, and the self-employed, the corporate tax increase from 26 to 29%, a permanent tax regime for advertisements in the media, in particular television, that have been scandalously exempt from taxation so far, an increased permanent increase in the luxury tax on recreational vessels, taxation on VLT machines and gaming machines of 30%. That was an unregulated part of the market and therefore untaxed. Reforms in pharmaceutical rebates. Perhaps far more importantly in the long term, and this is something I've mentioned before here, but I'd like to mention it once again because it is a momentous change in Greece. And it's one that I would like to impress upon you how difficult it was to push through Parliament, or to imagine pushing it through Parliament. We haven't pushed it yet, but we shall. That is the creation of a fully independent tax and customs authority outside the Ministry of Finance, along the lines of something like the IRS in the United States. The Fiscal Council that will be monitoring the budget, an independent fiscal council with the possibility, as I mentioned in our last meeting, of trading off policy space of the Greek government with an automated deficit brake. Regarding product market and administrative reforms that Christine mentioned, we have begun and announced formally a joint project with the OECD that will be that is already being implemented and which will spell out to the institutions in some detail. Just let me mention the headlines here. an anti-corruption drive throughout the Greek bureaucracy and the Greek procurement mechanisms, liberalization of the construction sector, which is an important sector for a country like Greece, especially as we're exiting the recession, the liberalization of wholesale trade, of electronic platforms, media as well as communications, removing the red tape drastically from the licensing of businesses and introducing digitalized one-stop shops, pension system reform that is serious long-term actuarial studies in conjunction with the OECD for the purposes of dealing with the problem of the sustainability of the pension system once and for all, and not just through parametric measures. In conjunction with the OECD and the ILO, the design of flexible collective bargaining agreements for the labor markets. In the realm of privatization, we have set out what is a realistic program. Let me remind you, colleagues, that the last programs of privatization in Greece were scandalously misjudged and ill-designed. Remember the 50 billions that were supposedly to be collected through privatization, when 1/50 was achieved in the end. We have set out a very realistic program. For this year, 1.4 billion, for 2016, 3.7 billion, and for 2017, 1.2 billion, in a market where asset prices have collapsed. And let me now complete by saying that, colleagues, these, of course, are critical moments. There is very little time left, and we all have to move. We believe that our government has moved a long way toward the position of the institutions. We have accepted fiscal measures that, in an economy which has not stopped shrinking, with no functioning banking system in terms of credit provision, with very little investment, in that kind of economy, we have accepted, in order to bring about this agreement, measures that are indeed recessionary. Even under fairly conservative estimates of fiscal multipliers, we're going to have a significant reduction in aggregate demand. For this package of reforms, to which we have acceded in order to conclude successfully the final review of at least the European program, setting for the moment aside the IMF program, which we can discuss later, which runs in parallel until March of 2016, for that program to have a chance of success, a chance of being viable, it must come together with an investor confidence building announcement regarding financing. And by financing, I don't mean just an extension of the current loans, a new package of loans which is not sustainable and which adds new debt on existing unsustainable debt. I'm referring to an announcement that inspires a high probability estimate in the mind of investors and citizens and consumers that Greece is going to be out of the woods soon. That Greece is about to be fully integrated, for instance, in the ECB's quantitative easing program. That we're not merely buying time until a few months later when we come back to this forum and have another discussion about the Greek crisis. Neither you nor we want to go to our parliaments yet again, after we go now, in order to solidify, in order to push through them the agreement that we are discussing today. This is why we're very much in favor of completing the review now, completing the second program, and establishing the measures that we are going to agree upon and which we are going to push through Parliament as the common conditionality, with an ESM facility that will allow for the effective transfer of the 27 billion of the legacy debt from the S&P program into a more manageable debt repayment schedule, so that we can have, on the one hand, our government accepting a MoU, a revised MoU, with significant recessionary measures in it, but also a flattening out, a smoothing out of the debt repayments to the S&P bonds for the next year, year and a half, 2 years, which runs against the grain of what we're agreeing to today, which is a package of reforms that makes Greece sustainable again. For us, the minimum condition to make this work, both financially, in terms of the funding gap, in terms of a modicum of hope that Greece will join quantitative easing, is an S&P buyback to smoothen out the short-term repayment schedule and to allow a degree of hope about participating in a program, the QE program, which, let's not forget, was created in order to defeat deflation. And this is significant for a country which is in the throes of deflation, probably the only country in the Eurozone today which is suffering a deflation rate of minus 2%. Surely, I believe the institutions can see that. I have no doubt, because I've heard this, I've discussed this with the good people of the IMF, that this balancing between an MoU that gives you what you need in order to seal the agreement with us, and at the same time, a minimal approach to the way that the debt must be managed more efficiently in order to make the MoU reforms potentially successful. This balancing act is essential for us in order to be able to seal this agreement. And to say that the Eurogroup, the Euro summit later today, the Greek government, each one of you taking this package to your parliaments, we have signed a sealed, a viable agreement for Greece, one that has considerable hope and a high probability of ensuring that we're not back here in a few months' time discussing the same problem again. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. Colleagues, I think that listening to the institutions, there are two ways to look at where we are, two ways to look at the proposals, and both are was of course only a first assessment because they came in only this morning. But I think Valdis said it was a good start for discussion. Pierre said it was a comprehensive package, but more work needs to be done. Benoit called it a right framework for discussion and had many questions on substance, specificity. Christine called it, after he said it was strategic and smart, she said there were some positive moves in there, but it also lacks specificity. It doesn't add up. Having said that, I think for us, the assessment of the institutions is crucial. The first thing that would have to happen for us to be able to give our political judgment is to hear on that more definite assessment by the institutions. And that would require still work with the Greek authorities, which could start immediately today to get the specifics, to get the details, to ask the questions that need to be asked, to understand what the proposals are, and to work on in the end, a very concrete, very specific list of prior actions. So we can have a first round of political remarks or values now, but I think on the basis of what we heard from the institutions, it's crucial that in the coming days, highly concentrated work needs to be done in order to see whether we can reach that agreement later this week. On the basis of what we have now, it is impossible to come to any final conclusions. That would be my assessment of where we are. But I'll open the floor to ministers to hear from your views and political guidance. Wolfgang?
Thanks, Harold. I can agree with your last remark. Since I didn't see one page, one sentence, I did not see any movement the sentence. I can give you any judgment, of course. I am careful listening to the three institutions. I would like to make remarks. My first remark is I follow closely what Pierre said, that the three institutions have to work together. But following the files I got over the weekend, of the last couple of days, I have to say it has been the opposite. It's happened again and again and again in the last couple of weeks. Commission before other institutions even got any proposal from government. It's a little bit in difference. The behavior that the institutions are closely work together to be therefore I would be very thankful if that could be, if we could get any additional explanation on this, because in for the German government, close cooperation between three institutions and not the blaming of one institution by others. There is a precondition for everything else. My second remark is that since we didn't get until now any judgment by the institutions, you say it's a good move, it's fine, by far not sufficient. Therefore we are in the very strange situation that we can do nothing. We will not deliver any preparation for the Euro Summit. If I got it right, our meeting has been invited to prepare a Euro Summit, which is in line with the rules. The European Summit should be prepared by the Eurogroup. We have been invited here, waiting. We have been told that it must be ended because there is additional preparation for the summit. But we will not be ready to deliver any preparation for your summit. And we should state it totally clear, there's no preparation for your summit because the precondition has not been delivered. Like I said, my third remark, therefore, whatever will be the consequences of this big war, the Euro Summit without any preparation is an interesting thing. Having said this, I would like to ask whether I got it right from Yanis, that he added in his remarks to this wonderful new proposal, third version, the additional conditionality that there must be a decision on the SMP. That has been, if I got it right, he said yes, this together with this SMP moving from the ECB to the ESM would be then it would be a solution. That is a conditionality which is not to be even to be discussed. We are clear because we are in line with the MoU and not with additional conditionality what has been said. Having said this, having in mind what Benoit said in our last meeting on Thursday, when he was asked by Louis if I got it right, and he made some remarks, and since we got the numbers of the outflow, I would like to ask, is the Greek government ready to implement capital controls? Because I think it's of essence. Capital controls are implemented, looking at what's going on. And I would like to ask the ECB whether the ECB is thinking about whether she can ask for capital controls without any additional decision in ELA.
Thank you. Any other remarks or questions at this point, Michael?
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Obviously, there has been a move in the right direction, and that's the welcome. It's building on the statement on February the 20th and on the development of that in the APMR. It doesn't deliver the terms of the APMR, but progress has been made. It's a document which I believe could be built on. But it came very late, and effectively it makes our meeting today redundant. we're not in a position to prepare for a Euro summit, so we're not in a position to carry out our legal obligations in that space of the Eurogroup preparing for a Euro summit. I'm not sure what will happen at the informal summit this evening, but it seems to me that we need some space, not a lot of space, but we need at least from now until Thursday so that the institutions can do a full assessment and if possible come up with a staff agreement and brief us on it in great detail. At the conclusion of Yanis's remarks, he referred to SNP and the smoothing out of debt, the debt profile and the transfer of liabilities from the central bank to the ESM. I wouldn't have thought that was a runner, but I'd like to see the central bank's assessment of that and the views of Klaus Regling on that as well. It's very, very late for making moves, and I'm extremely worried about the ELA situation. I can't see how ELA can be justified for much longer. Daily increases of 2 billion euros on ELA seem to be very near the ten-ice position at this stage. And I agree with Wolfgang. I think capital controls, if the process of negotiation is to continue for some time, I think capital controls need to be put in place in Greece to provide the safety net, which is necessary to allow EMA to continue. But taking it all in all, I hope we can work forward towards a solution. It's a better position than we were in last week. But it's not a question of time running out. In my view, time has run out. We need immediate action.
Thank you. Monsieur?
First of all, I'm pleased that there is some movement. Second, I cannot identify very much new content in this proposal. There are some changes in the figures, not so much new content in this proposal. The third thing, we always discuss from the base of this aid memoir, which is a non-paper and unknown by all the ministers of finance in this room. And we said that there is a movement to this aid memoir which is unknown. So let me point out, can the institutions confirm that this non-paper is in line with the flexibility we decided in February with our statement and agreement with Greece? If it is in line, that's probably the base for the discussions which are necessary in the next hours and days. But if it's not in line, and it's much more than the flexibility we agreed in February, that must be a discussion in between the ministers of finance. So I don't know exactly what is the content of this statement. The discussions about the non-paper is very difficult for us to make the right decision.
Okay, a number of questions have been raised, so, sorry.
Thanks, Jeroen. I actually have a few questions to ask rather than statements to make. The only statement I would make is, while I'm pleased to hear from institutions that there is some movement in the right direction, but of course it all depends on how far we go. Let me say, for what it's worth, that this discussion could have taken place much earlier than today. And it could have taken place on the basis of more information. I'm referring to what Hans-Georg just said. Certainly this does not help. I have two questions. One question is to institutions. I understand from your language and the adjectives you use in assessing state that there are disagreements. So I don't want to enter into the details of the agreement in this room, but of course, as long as there is major disagreement among institutions, it's very difficult to, on the basis of that, provide a political assessment. We must rely on a common view of the institutions on where we stand and whether there is mileage to make going forward. So this is my first point. My second point, which was, let me take up a point which Pierre, I'm now wrong, according to my notes, made about and others, the prior action story. Let's face it, we need to rebuild trust at a minimum level that allows us to move forward. And to the extent that prior actions are an instrument to provide more confidence, I would urge that these are put forward and met, and this is directly especially to the Adherence of the Greek government. We badly need this, or because if we don't have it, let's not hide ourselves, then really we're wasting our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerome. First of all, I am also happy that we have started to see some movement, apparently, in the right direction. I share the same view that Pier Carlo with respect to how we have reached this situation, that we have started to comment and to elaborate on potential capital controls. How much time we have lost, and how is it possible that we have reached this situation, that we are on the verge of collapse. Thirdly, I don't know what I have to tell my boss, for the meeting of today. I can tell him that, the institutions have a good impression about the recent proposal, but that there is not a concrete assessment about the real situation. So, immediately he's going to reply, why have I been reconvened with the rest of the heads to this meeting? Why? And I think that is a fair question for everybody. And my concern is that we have generated expectations. I don't know if you have seen the reaction of the markets today, the capital markets, but now we, someone is sending the signal that we are on the right track, that I think that we are on the right track, a little bit late, but apparently we are on the right track. But I would be extremely careful with creating this kind of expectations, because if there is one thing that everybody around this table should be aware, is that markets overshoot. So the reaction of today might be offset tomorrow in the other way around. And what we are creating at the end of the day is only one thing: volatility. Volatility in the marketplace. So it's something that we have to take into consideration and to bear in mind. And finally, as Pier Carlo and others, I would like to ask two questions. The first one is about debt reprofiling. We can call it, semantics is very ample, but I would like to know, the proposals. Are we thinking about any sort of restructuring of the debt? Is there any proposal in that direction? And the second one, also for the institutions, is taking into consideration that this is a first assessment. Does the implementation of the last version of, the last proposal of the Greek government imply any sort of additional funding? And I would like to have, just, a general impression about that. Will it require additional finance from the ESM or whatever if, supposing and accepting that the Greek government implements all the measures, that, this plan, the full implementation of this plan, will imply any additional funding for the Greek authorities?
Okay, thank you.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Yvon. Juste quelques mots. Comme chacun d'entre vous, je n'ai pas eu en main l'aide-mémoire. L'aide-mémoire était une manière d'aider aussi le gouvernement grec à avancer un certain nombre de propositions. Et ce qui compte, ce sont les propositions faites par le gouvernement grec, le jugement que l'on peut porter sur ces propositions. Je n'ai pas non plus eu à lire ces propositions, mais lorsque Yannick s'exprime, je l'écoute. Et dans ce que dit Yannick aujourd'hui, je vois des choses nouvelles, clairement nouvelles, par rapport à ce qu'il a pu dire, par exemple, ne serait-ce que jeudi dernier. Donc je constate qu'à l'évidence, et beaucoup d'entre nous l'ont fait déjà, il y a un mouvement réel, et un mouvement qui va dans le sens que nous pouvions souhaiter pour les propositions émanant du gouvernement grec nous permettent de porter un jugement et à partir de là de prendre des décisions. Je constate aussi en écoutant les institutions qu'elles ont utilisé des mots pour qualifier ces propositions qui sont des mots différents de ceux qui avaient été utilisés la semaine dernière. Bref, je ne vais pas en dire plus de ce point de vue-là, mais nous ne pouvons pas considérer que nous sommes aujourd'hui dans la même situation que la semaine dernière. La situation a évolué, et elle a évolué positivement. Et à partir de là, j'ai dit la difficulté à imaginer, d'abord parce que nos chefs d'État et de gouvernement ont été convoqués ce soir, parce qu'il y a des propositions évidemment nouvelles, parce que le jugement des institutions est différent de ce qu'il pouvait porter comme jugement la semaine dernière ou les semaines précédentes. Je ne peux pas imaginer qu'il ne se passe rien aujourd'hui, qu'on en reste exactement à la même situation précédente, où la seule question qui serait posée serait de savoir combien de capitaux vont sortir et quels sont les moyens de limiter cette fuite des capitaux. Je trouve que ce serait vraiment une vision extrêmement négative qui a porté sur la situation d'aujourd'hui. Je suis prêt à constater avec beaucoup d'entre vous qu'il y a encore beaucoup de travail, il y a des précisions, il y a une nécessité de la part des institutions de creuser, il y a nécessité, les questions qui ont été posées par les uns et les autres sont les bonnes questions, de savoir quelles sont les nécessités de financement à venir, et y compris si la question de la dette, comme en novembre 2012, est posée, quels sont les bons moyens acceptables par les uns et les autres d'y répondre. Donc évidemment, on ne va pas dire qu'aujourd'hui, on peut conclure sur tout. Mais je serais quand même très gêné qu'on ne puisse pas conclure sur quelque chose. Parce que vraiment, je pense que ce serait un signal donné à l'extérieur qui serait un signal dangereux pour nous tous. Donc, le chemin a été parcouru. Il faut que d'une manière ou d'une autre, nous reconnaissions que ce chemin a été parcouru. Sinon, vraiment, la lecture extérieure serait, à mon avis, une lecture qui risquerait de nous être préjudiciable.
Thank you. Questions that have been raised for the others first, then to the conclusions, and we'll try to draw a conclusion for as far as we can today. Yes.
Thank you very much, Jeroen. Colleagues, we are working through the night and during the day towards a good agreement. We have a duty to complete it quickly. Today is an important day. The Euro Summit is going to prove crucial in creating the mood for establishing the framework within which we are going to be able to do the technical work, speed it up towards this goal, this collective goal. I was asked by Wolfgang a very straightforward question, and I have a duty to give a straightforward answer. You asked me, Wolfgang, whether the Greek government is ready and willing to impose capital controls. Our view, let me make this crystal clear, is that there is no need whatsoever for capital controls as long as we are successful in bringing about this agreement. The Greek public have shown immense calmness despite being bombarded both by the Greek media, by the foreign media, by us politicians with a great deal of insecurity and a great deal of almost terrorizing news regarding bank closures, capital controls, and so on. The moment we, the politicians, the technocrats, our leaders, announce that an agreement has been struck, there will be no need for capital controls. But beyond that, let me remind you that Greece is not an island with a single airport, without common borders with the rest of the European continent. Capital controls will be almost impossible to implement properly. And going down that road is going to unleash forces which I do not believe that any one of us can be confident that we can control. On the question that, another question that was asked about the midterm financing effectively. This is a very serious reform agenda that we're discussing. This MoU that we're renegotiating, and hopefully we shall conclude either today or tomorrow, or maybe, as Michael said, by Wednesday or Thursday, is a very difficult package for us politically. And I have no doubt that it's a very difficult package for you too. All of us will have difficulty pushing it through our parliaments. It should end the crisis. It should be the last time you have to do this and we have to do this. But in order to be able to do this, we need to look at the repayment schedule, which was designed, let me remind you, a long, long time ago, before the fiscal numbers and the growth numbers were derailed after 2012. The proposal that we're putting forward is really very simple. Once we are happy with the conditionalities, once we agree on the conditionalities, once we have a timetable for prior actions, as Piercarlo said, we should embed this within a framework that makes sense and gives it the air of sound public finance, which is necessary in which not to suffocate. So the point here is very simple. Let me just describe it once more, but very succinctly. The idea is that we have these 27 billion sitting on the books of the ECB, which are preventing us from returning to the markets. Market access is what we promise at the end of every agreement. Without QE, Greece will find it very difficult. It will be actually a cruel irony if the only country that needs it so badly is the one that is excluded from it. The only way we can do this is by, without going to our parliament again in a few months' time or in a year's time, and meanwhile losing this opportunity of taking advantage of a program which will not last forever. If we don't jump on the bandwagon of QE now, we are going to miss out on this. So the proposal is this. The MoU that we are negotiating should be, of course, the basis for completing the current review, the fifth review. And at the same time, that completes the European program. We have a new agreement with loan arrangement with the ESM, using the same conditionality, not one new euro for the Greek government in terms of spending, of using. The new ESM agreement on the same conditions allows us to perform an S&P buyback from the ECB, retire those bonds. The S&P profits, which will be something like around 9 billion, can be dispersed in doses with reviews every time, so that the implementation of the MoU is monitored properly. And on top of that, we can have an agreement as part of this same arrangement that Greece's participation in QE, which will have been made possible by this agreement, is also conditional on the reviews, on regular reviews of the implementation of the MoU. Colleagues, the only reason why I am tiring you with this is because we need to answer the question: how do we make this MoU that we're describing, the set of conditionalities, not only politically feasible, but also how can we create a space in the midterm for public financial intervention that can make it breathe, work, so that this Eurogroup is not saddled yet again in a few months' time with more crunch meetings like this one.
Thank you. I will turn to Pierre.
Juste un mot.
Oui.
Les remarques des collègues sur ce point.
Γύρισε στα γαλλικά για πρώτη φορά. Πώς ήταν αυτό, παιδί?
Όπως πάντα, καλύτερα στο respond
Ναι.
Only if you want to participate. I just have said to Pierre, no answer on my question. Because I got it that there have been positive comments from Commission before other institutions even got any problem like this. And that seems to me a little bit of miracle. Having in mind that there is a close cooperation across the institutions. Since we are not idiots, we better get it, whoever is went in the Commission, if you could do any game to blame the IMF. Without the full involvement of the IMF, there will be no decision. I know better. And I know this is an ongoing story since months and weeks and whoever is concerned, but I have to say very clearly, very outspoken, and what happened the last couple of days is really a scandal.
Yeah. Idiots και
As a
σκάνδαλο.
matter of fact, I thought I answered in kind of that in quite a diplomatic way. One that will answer me. It was never in the mind of the Commission, any stage of the Commission, to act without the IMF. It was never in the mind of the Commission to blame the IMF. And if you remember, last week here, in this very meeting, I said that it was no way for us to work without the IMF. And so maybe reacted faster, without waiting, but we can work together if we want to work together. Right. Benoit or Mario. Maybe a little difficult for Mario to step in, but if he feels he's ready.
Benoit debriefed me quickly on the discussion. One general point is the following. This was supposed to be a rather confidential gathering. Then we first discovered we are being taped. But then second, probably even more seriously, a sentence that was pronounced during the last Eurogroup meeting was reported to the newspapers and went to the wires. And the consequences are making our lives more difficult, not less difficult. So it's actually a self-destructive episode, which I don't think should be repeated. It certainly works against the possibility of having a candid discussion. Having said that, I understand there is an interest about knowing how long we'll be providing ELA. Was this the question?
No.
Yeah,
No, it wasn't. The question is, do we need capital controls?
Me, not other colleagues.
Okay.
Not regular control.
Yeah.
Having that, if I may, to defend
No,
the
sorry, can I finish? Just let me finish. I haven't finished with my second point. Now, I appreciate this interest, obviously.
Press the button.
Yeah? Yes. I appreciate the interest in knowing how long we're going to continue providing ELA. It's obviously a very important point in the overall policy discussion. But I think you will want to appreciate that our independence work in all directions. So I'm not asking you questions about your fiscal policy, although I have to refrain myself from doing it from time to time. And then I would expect the same refrain from your side. So we'll assess every day the developments. We have done it this morning. We'll do it later as well. Now we are in the situation. But more than that, I frankly don't say and can't say. Thank you.
Thank you. Klaus, questions also asked.
Yes, I think Michael asked whether the proposal from Jan is doable, and the answer is no. The ESM has no instrument to take over assets which are at CCD or transfer or buyout. That's not feasible. We don't have an instrument. The instrument that could be used is a normal loan to the Greek government with conditionality as described in the ESM treaty, and the money can of course be used to give to the ECB. Also, one more warning, we cannot do 27 billion within 1 month. The ESM is a very successful issue on the market, as you know. We talked about that during our annual meeting last Thursday. But there are limits of what we can do in a short period of time. So it would have to be spread out, but it can only be done in the context of an overall adjustment program.
Just 1 second.
Giannis, please.
Very briefly, Klaus, I think there is a misunderstanding. I never proposed a swap. What I proposed was exactly what you said, that the same conditionalities to be used for a new loan arrangement so that the Greek government borrows that money from the ESM, uses it to buy back the SMP bonds to retire them, and therefore the liability is effectively transferred from the ECB to the ESM. It will be a new program, it will be a new loan, according to the constitution, to the charter of the ESM, but there will be the same conditionality that we are agreeing upon these days.
Thank you very much, Julian. And I just want to mention one thing. Looking at the immediate future, the IMF is certainly determined to do everything it can to work in good intelligence with the other two institutions, which clearly is the most helpful way forward in view of the urgency of the matters that we have ahead of us. Second point, I want to answer a couple of questions that have been raised because I don't want to mislead members of the Eurogroup, and I want them to understand what and why we're doing certain things. The famous aide-memoire has been put together by the three institutions and certainly constitutes a dilution, a watering down, loosening of what was in the memorandum. And that is not very unusual given the way we have to operate. When we do a review of a program and the situation have changed, the perspectives have changed, the team is different, we just have to adapt to the new reality and integrate this new universe into the program. That's what we do on most reviews that we conduct. So under the circumstances, it's completely clear that in order to make progress towards one day a satisfactory review, we have to adjust. So that's what it is. It's been watered down, it's diluted, it was sensible to actually do that because of that new reality. And it does include hard, difficult steps, significant structural reforms, not all of them, but it adjusted to the reality. Which is the reason why in the area of financing, which for the IMF has to be very clear and specific for the next 12 months, more will be needed and will probably include some debt reprofiling, which if we stick to the MMO as it is, could not require haircuts. So, I'm completely open and transparent with you as to what steps we have to take in case of change of circumstances. That's what it is.
But that's what I proposed. No haircuts.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm going to try and come to conclusions. Now, first conclusion would be that there can be no conclusion on the basis of the information that we have been given today. You must realize that the fact that there is a summit tonight is a decision that was, of course, taken elsewhere. But if there is a summit, then we must prepare it. We have tried to do so today, but given the information we have now and the late arrival of proposals and the work that the institutions still have to do on that, it's impossible to have a final opinion or advice from the Eurogroup to our bosses, as I think Louis called his boss. Having said that, that is also an advice to the summit tonight. That on where we stand now, it will be impossible to come to an agreement today. Second point would be that many of you have said, and I would like to underline that, we do welcome the new proposals. We feel that it is a possible step in the right direction. I think those are the words that many of you have used. Yet the proposals will have to be assessed very specifically. If there are any gaps, they must be filled. And it will have to be translated in a very concrete prior action list, which can be delivered in a very short period. That prior action list is also a chance to fill in any gaps, to make concrete where there is vagueness, and to deliver specifics where needed. That work, and so I've also understood from three institutions, can start immediately. Also, Janus referred to that. Three institutions are determined to work closely together. If that did not happen at certain moments, then it certainly will happen from now on. We welcome that. Thank them for all their efforts. That work can start immediately with a view to reach, if possible, a final agreement later this week. That also means, in my mind, that we will, if such a result is accessible, is possible, that we will have to have an extra Eurogroup and Fourth Council meeting. Two other points. First, some of you have asked about financing needs, and others have mentioned debt. On financing needs, I think we will have to come back to that later this week. It depends, of course, on how tough and concrete the final deal is. So we will also have to ask the institutions to come back on that issue to us if we have an extra Eurogroup this week. On debt, if the Greek government puts that forward as a precondition, having deep debt restructuring or even haircut, I think that will blow up the deal, to be quite frank. We've discussed it many times in the Eurogroup. I know the ministers on this issue.
Put forward anything about
It
haircuts.
is and has always been
Let's see
along the lines of the statement of November 2012. And that statement said that the full implementation, first of all, the Greek government has to stick to all its commitments, in other words, has to complete the program. The program has been off track for almost a year now, and it's not completed. Secondly, the second element in our statement of November 12 was that if necessary, in other words, if necessary, we would look again, we would consider, that's a third element, we would consider to look at measures to bring down the debt burden. And that promise from November 2012 was quite clear. I don't see a lot of political space to change that way of arguing. And making moves now or promises now in terms of debt profiling, debt restructuring, at this point would certainly make a deal impossible. That's my political assessment. Of course, the leaders may feel different, though I don't think so. Having said that, we will also come back to this discussion if there is a basis for an agreement in the Eurogroup later this week. In terms of communication, I will let's first check if we agree so far. If that is the case, then I think in terms of communication, of course everyone will use his own words, but I will say that we welcome the new proposals by the Greek government, that they have not yet been assessed. They will have to be assessed by the institutions, who will jointly immediately start work with the Greek authorities to go through the proposals, to see whether that can be later this week put into a list of prior actions, which is the basis for an agreement.